Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to COASTER-net Update. We've got breaking news this morning out of Vaughan, Ontario, Canada, where Canada's Wonderland has unveiled Yukon Striker for the 2019 season. I have the POV playing up here on my screen right now. As we expected, it is a B&M dive coaster, will claim 3 world records, the tallest, fastest, and longest dive coaster in the world. Top speed 80 miles per hour. That's 130 kilometers per hour for those of you north of the border. The longest dive coaster at 3,625 feet. That's 1,105 meters. And the tallest dive coaster, it's got a it says 245 feet. Now, I don't know, it doesn't specify if that's the actual height or the drop. I would suspect that's the height by the wording, at 75 meters, and that includes the underground tunnel. So maybe they are talking about the drop there, the underwater tunnel that goes right through the vortex helix, as we've been seeing them do work on already, even into this past off season. So Andy, what are your thoughts here? I mean, it's to me, my initial reaction is it looks like it'll be better than Valraven. It does a little bit more than Valraven does. Valraven, I think, was a tad underwhelming for folks. Maybe expected a little bit more. People generally seem to be a little bit more excited about this. It does have an extra inversion, but I mean, it really does a lot of the same stuff. And for me, it's going to have the vests. So, and I don't like the vests I like the vests in general, but on the dive coasters, I think it really hinders the floating feeling you get on those drops. We've argued that to no end before. Yeah. So for me, I think it's going to be, it looks like it should be better than Valraven, but I have a hard time getting super, super excited about it because I know those vests are going to be there. But overall, I think it looks like it'll be a good ride. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's two main things that separate this from Valraven. And I don't know, are these two things that amazing that make it, like I said, I think it's going to be better than Valraven. It's going to be taller. It's going to, you're like Rob Decker says, you're going to add that height right in the middle of the drop. That's going to, that's the main event anyway. So you're making the main event better on this ride. I think a lot of people criticize Valraven for not having a tunnel or not having some sort of dive into something feature. This is going to have that with the dive into the lake. And then really the only other thing that separates this ride for me is the standard vertical loop that we have not seen on any dive coaster anywhere. We've seen it on, like you said earlier, we've seen it on, wing coasters before. So you probably already have experienced it on Thunderbird or Wild Eagle with being off the edge of the track, and going through a vertical loop. So yes, it's going to be a good ride. It's going to be a fun ride. But I will criticize those people that are saying, "Oh my God, this is amazing," when a few years ago they all shit on Valraven.
I mean,
there's no reason to. It's essentially the same thing.
Does it have more than Valraven? Yes. Does it look like it should be better than Valraven? Yes. Is it that drastically different from Valraven? No, it's not. No. We always said, wouldn't it be cool if they had an underwater tunnel or whatever? Because Tony Clark had put that in the to-do list years ago. This kind of has that. It'd be cool if maybe if they had lights in the tunnel or some fog of some sort. I think that would be kind of cool. To at least Shikra does have the underground drop off the second brake run, and Griffin kind of goes under a bridge, but doesn't really have a dive into a tunnel.
Shikra, they've built up the tunnels too.
They have the tube around it where you go into it halfway down, and then obviously Oblivion over at Alton Towers does the same thing. This looks similar to what like a Baron 1898 does, which is a much smaller ride over there in the Netherlands, but it does a similar tunnel at ground level type of thing where it goes up into a dive loop. So this will be kind of cool. The most interesting thing for me on this really is that second inversion, because all the dive coasters really, at least over here, go down the drop and then into the Immelman. But then the next inversion, it starts off like a 0G roll, but then it rolls out to the side like a dive loop into the vertical loop. So it's kind of like the first half is a 0G, and then the second half it rolls out sort of like a corkscrew or a dive loop, kind of going the other way. It almost reminds me of doesn't Hang Time have an element kind of like that, where it starts like a roll and then ends like a dive loop? So that'll be kind of cool. It'll all depend on the speed that some of these elements are taken with, and again, for me personally, the vests, I want the hang time out of those, and they're always up against you. You still fall out of your seat a little bit, but certainly not as much as with the old restraints.
See, I fall out of my seat a lot because I'm a little bit heavier, so I can work against those vests pretty nicely. Whereas with the hard restraints, I can't work against.
See,
like,
but I have a lot of room between my shoulders and the hard restraints to begin with, and a lot of people don't.
And that's the difference there. Like that's.
And I'm a shorter person. So, when I ride rides like I-305 and Maverick, which I've ridden both of those very recently, I have a lot of room between my shoulder and the vests. So they don't make a huge difference, and they're actually right by my ears. So it's a more comfortable ride on those particular rides. But on these where the vests are actually resting against your chest and your collarbone, I have the same complaint that someone taller like a Rob Dole has about the Maverick vests, where they're already resting on his shoulders. So I think there's a lot of good things here. The other thing I will say is just this past weekend I rode Dominator down to King's Dominion, and in the back seat of that ride in the vertical loop, there is a little bit of hang time because you do go, that is a large loop, and you go through it at a slower speed at the top, and that is one of the highlights of that ride for me, is that vertical loop. So there's potential for a vertical loop on this ride to be like that. Now again, you still have the vest there, so it's kind of to pick your poison there. If there's hang time in the inversions like there is on some of the other dive coasters or on some other rides like that, or are these inversions going to be more like the Thunderbird Wild Eagle style, where it's more of a positive force in here? I think that remains to be seen.
Well, I think just given the speed that you're doing a lot of this stuff at, even when you get towards the end there with that vertical loop, it still looks like you're taking that at a pretty nice clip. So I think it's going to be more of a forceful loop than it is a hang time loop.
And I think given the vests on the ride, I think I would enjoy that more out of this one, because Griffin, Shikra, and Valraven to a point are more graceful rides, and they perform their elements at slower speeds to kind of give you that Sue would call it that lilty feeling, sort of that floaty, graceful feeling. And I feel like if you were to maybe make this ride and have it in such a way, it does look like these elements are being taken with more speed than maybe the other dive coasters. So if you were to make this a more intense, pin you to your seat type of ride as opposed to the lilty, graceful type of ride, then all of a sudden that changes the game a little bit, because it has a little bit of a different dynamic than some of these dive coasters. And it certainly seems like, at least these rendering videos, you might have that feeling a little bit. I mean, it is really big. It's going to be really fast. It should be forceful at times. So I think that's definitely maybe an asterisk on this one. Maybe it'll have a little bit of a different feel than some of the other ones.
And I think the other thing to mention too is that you really don't have a second dive on this coaster. That you have that.
No, it's a small one.
You have that elongated, mid-course, and then when you come off of that, it's almost like a slide down, almost like a gatekeeper slide down, more so than a dive. You think of Valraven and you come to almost a complete stop, and then you literally dive again. So this one doesn't have that, but I'll say this too.
This one looks like it would be like 80 or 90 feet, which is smaller than most of the second drops on the other ones here.
And this one, it's going to provide some pretty cool visuals. That after that mid course, you're gonna do that helix around the midway, and that's going to be really cool. To stand in the middle of that thing and watch the whole train go around you. The only other ride that I can think of that you get a similar experience to that as maybe Mantis / Rougarou if you're standing in the queue line where it
Yeah.
literally like spins around you. There's not a whole lot of rides that do that, and I think it's interesting because Cedar Fair has kind of shied away from putting rides over the Midway, and it seems like they're like really like going all in with that over the Midway stuff on that Helix, which I think is going to be cool. I love that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
that's been kind of a more recent thing, you know. Obviously, with Gatekeeper and Fury, they did it over the entrances,
Yeah.
but you know, so that's they've also done rides like Banshee and Mystic Timbers that have been really nowhere near people. But then Valraven goes over that area too, so it seems like they're kind of picking and choosing where they want to do it.
Yeah.
But when they do it in a pretty spectacular fashion. Views on this are going to be real nice. You're going to be facing the mountain there, which will be kind of cool. You'll be looking across the park at Leviathan, which will be the only coaster at the park that is bigger. You know, this will be bigger than Behemoth in terms of height here.
And some people have asked about the really long mid course, but if you watch those videos, it's going over
going over Timberwolf Falls there.
Yeah, so like I think that's part of it why you have such a long mid course is they needed to get over that structure.
And Leviathan needed to get over buildings, so maybe it's a Canadian thing where they just really like their really long brake runs.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the last thing to touch on here is the name itself. And one thing that I have always said is you can make a bad name good by making a cool logo. I said the same thing about Gatekeeper. I thought Gatekeeper was a so-so name, and then the logo came out, and I was sold. When we heard the name late last night, when the CBC actually leaked the POV, we got the name, but we didn't see the logo. So you and I were kind of talking. It's like it's kind of a weird name.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they went with Gold Striker and then they just made it Canadian and made it the Yukon because it's the same thing. But, you know, I wanted to see what the logo was, and lo and behold, there's a bird in the middle of the logo. So
well, you watch that opening video and you know the bird's a big part of it. It's a golden bird, so they didn't go all in with Ziz, but the bird
they kind of still did it.
Yeah, but the bird, because like a lot of people are like, oh, the bird's not going to have anything to do with it, that's just a red herring and da-da-da-da-da. And no, the bird's
got everything to do with
it. The bird's going to be an integral part of this ride.
It's front and center.
And I assume that bird is going to be on almost every single piece of merchandise that they're going to produce. That bird is going to become the centerpiece.
And they've got the mountain in the background. They've got the trees, so they make it very, you know, Yukon Klondike-esque, which is, you know, going back to some of the teasers that showed up at Cedar Point. And, you know, we're going to have to do a whole separate discussion on whether or not we think now that we know what it is, whether or not we think that those were actually for this ride, because it's pretty apparent that some of the numbers do not match up. So we're going to have to do a whole separate show about, you know, how and if that even plays in at all. It's possible that maybe it doesn't. But you know, there was certainly a Gold Rush type. You know, the teaser that showed up at Canada's Wonderland had a Klondike feel to it.
Well, yeah. So, like, if you read the story on the bottom of the page, like they mention all those things. They mentioned the Klondike. They mentioned the Chillicoot Trail.
Yeah.
You know, they mention all those types of things in there. And then they play on the golden eagle that is there watching over these people hunting for gold. So,
and they're retheming the whole back area, basically that back loop from Vortex over to where this ride and Mindbuster are, as Frontier Canada, which they claim was a themed area that was supposed to open with the park in 1981 and never really come to fruition. And when we learned that, I said, you know, that does not surprise me at all, because in that same loop, right by Vortex, you have Soaring Timbers, which was 2 years ago, and then the Lumberjack Flat Ride, which was this past year. So they were really, really kind of setting the stage to re-theme that section there as Frontier Canada with those flat rides, the flying canoes, of course, as well. And then Timberwolf Falls and Whitewater Canyon also fit into that very nicely.
And I also say this, that if you watch the POV video at the end, you can see that the station house is going to be like mine themed. It looks a lot like Maverick Station, the Beast Station.
Yeah.
It's going to be, and that's unusual because usually Cedar Fair does not put the stations inside their videos when they announce them. So I think usually it's a big question mark. I remember with Valraven, we didn't know what that station was going to look like all the way up until when we first saw it, when they were building it.
Well, yeah, I mean, we saw that it looked somewhat generic, and we weren't sure if it was going to be generic, and it ended up being fairly generic. But I mean, it's nice looking, but
but this is here clearly. It is going to be.
This is very clearly themed.
So so that you can play that as part of the stuff that we saw all over the place, I would assume.
Yeah.
With that, but the logo I think is okay. The Yukon Striker, it has a very Gold Striker feel to it. The font is nearly the same as Gold Striker. Gold Striker is a little bit more ornate on the ends and stuff.
Yeah, and Gold Striker is a bit plumper.
Yeah.
This has more of a thin look to it. So,
but it still has those like little arrows in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So it has a very similar feel. I think different enough though, where I'm not like, oh, why they do it like that? But
yeah, I draw fewer comparisons between this and Gold Striker than I did with Mystic Timbers and Twisted Timbers.
Oh yeah, those were.
So I mean, Yukon Striker it's not a horrible name. It's not a great name. I think the name's okay. But again, like with Gatekeeper, I think it's an okay name. It's a better logo, and I think when you put the logo in there and everything, I think it ties it together. And would you like it better than Gold Hawk?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's
more unique than Something Hawk, so I'll give them that.
And yeah, because that's been the Cedar Fair go-to for years. But I think adding the bird in is really going to set the whole merchandise apart from one another. That I feel the golden bird is going to become the centerpiece, and that'll be cool. I like it.
And maybe the bird's name will be Ziz.
Who knows? You can call it Ziz if you want, I guess.
Sure.
So I think at the end of the day here, I think it's a solid addition for Canada's Wonderland. It's a lot of what we expected it was going to be. It's not the Giga that some people were hoping for.
I think the real key here is when Cedar Fair took over Canada's Wonderland, the thought was they don't have a big headlining signature coaster. They got Behemoth. Then the argument was they have one headliner signature coaster. They got Leviathan. Then it was like, well, they don't have a real support. Vortex was always the third best ride out there under the Cedar Fair regime. And then they put in Guardian, which was a nice, dark ride style thing that's kind of, fallen off a little bit from the maintenance perspective. A lot of the guns don't work, which is whatever. The one thing they've never had is the signature looping coaster, because Leviathan, Behemoth, and Vortex, the clear top three there for many years, and even if you want to throw Guardian there, the top four coasters there don't have inversions. So this really fills a role at that park that they've never had filled in having the signature looping coaster. The Aero Dragonfire it does not fit the bill. The SLC does not fit the bill. I mean, those
Dragonfire is not a bad ride.
No, it's not a bad ride, but it's not a signature coaster with inversions.
Yeah.
Now they have it.
Yeah. I think this is going to be a big addition for the park, and hopefully and I believe this is only the start for what they're going to do. That we're going to do a whole nother show here because with questions being answered, more questions.
There's really more coming, Andy.
There might be really more coming. And this is not only, so we said the Yukon Canada was one thing, or Frontier Canada was one thing, but they're also doing Winterfest too up there. They announced, so that was another.
Yeah, how about that?
That's big piece of news there. So
we should say that we should say this in case anyone else is jumping on this. We're not going to do it in this video. We're going to do a whole separate video. But coming up in a few days, maybe once the announcements are done this week, Andy and I are going to go through why we think there might be really more coming.
Yeah, this is interesting here. So as always, thank you for joining us here on COASTER.net update. So we've been down this road, but there is more coming. There's a lot more announcements in front of us. There's more in front of us than behind us, hopefully, I guess.
Yeah, well, we'll find out tomorrow, won't we?
So as always, I'm Andrew Barczyk from Chicago. It's too early for me, Danny.
He's from Chicago, Illinois. I'm Danny Miller from Binghamton, New York.
Right on.
See you guys. Oh my God.